Kay Swinburne, Conservative MEP for Wales. What is this concern that you have about eels and a traditional industry in Wales?
I think it's really important here when we work in the European Parliament that we take into account sustainable industries that we have back home. And for me, the eel fishing that goes on in the Severn estuary is really critically important for a small group of fishermen. And so to actually have moderate proportionate legislation is going to be really important. And there has been mooted, of course, an outright ban on any form of eel fishing in order to protect stocks in the whole of the EU. The EU does need its stocks of eels protected, but I think we need to actually make sure that those small sustainable fishing vessels and fishermen can actually maintain their living whilst we actually preserve the stocks. And many of them are contributing to that restocking that we actually want to see. So I think proportion in everything we do here is critically important.
As things stand, what could this legislation, it's all in the process, but as things stand, what could it mean for the fishery in Wales?
Well, what I'm hoping is that we can actually prevent the outright ban, which would actually mean that all fishing would have to stop immediately, including those who are involved in any of the sustainable projects involving restocking, which would be fairly outrageous given that we're trying to actually bring the eel stocks up across the EU. Of course, the UK has got some of the largest stocks of the juvenile eels, and so they're actually being moved, caught in our waters, and moved to other places around the EU in order to protect the stocks elsewhere. So we need to actually make sure we allow this to continue to happen. And what I'm hoping for is compromises that recognise that. Compromises that will actually call for scientific studies to be done and for everything to be based upon the evidence. Because if we actually start banning things before we have the evidence of what needs to be done, there are lots of issues affecting eels. It's not just the fishing of them that's actually a problem. There are things like pollution that are affecting them in other parts of the EU, and also blocks in the migratory path, their natural flow from sea to the fresh water when they actually come back from spawning. So it's really important that we get this right. And the scientific studies obviously need to back up any future legislation we then might need in terms of future bans. But at the moment, there is no need for a ban. I think we need to do this in a proportionate way.
And so, as things stand in Wales, this isn't a very large-scale industry, is it? But nonetheless, you see this as important to keep this as a tradition that it continues.
Absolutely, and it's really important within Wales. We have a very small fishing fleet as it is. For any type of fishing, it's really important that we actually preserve our culture and our heritage of fishing. Given that we are surrounded on water on three sides, it's really important to us to maintain that. But it's also important that we actually do have a sustainable way forwards. And our Welsh fishermen, because they are relatively small, are very sustainable in their fishing methods. So I think we need to encourage them rather than actually put them and make them part of a big blanket ban.
If there was a blanket ban, presumably this would mean jobs would disappear in parts of Wales. It might not be a huge number, but it would presumably mean some people would lose their livelihoods.
They would, and it's a very small number in Wales, but obviously in certain parts of the United Kingdom it's very large. Northern Ireland have got a huge eel fisheries, and therefore actually for the UK as a whole as a member state, this could have a major impact on employment of fishing men and women in this field. So the UK is more of a problem. In Wales it's more of a cultural and more of a sustainable fishing issue, because obviously they've been fishing these stocks for many, many years in a sustainable way. If you start withdrawing that, you can have a knock-on impact on other ecologies in places like the Severn estuary that are imbalanced right now.
And just finally, we're going to hear in the vote tomorrow how things actually go. Are you hopeful that you can get this legislation amended into a way that's more workable for you and your industry in Wales?
Certainly what I've seen so far about the compromises that we're voting on tomorrow are actually much more positive. They are calling for that evidence to be produced. They're calling for a lot more proportionate measures to be taken. And they are now finally aware that if they have a ban, it would also prevent the restocking that is going to be so critical for building up the stocks elsewhere in the EU. So I hope tomorrow we're going to see a measured and proportionate response by the committee.